Today's session is about report writing, and it is very important because we will discuss in detail the template of your research report and what you should include in each section of your research report. First of all, we need to differentiate between a research report and reports for your other subjects or other sessions. The basic difference between the research report and other reports is the degree of control, the degree of rigorousness and caution required in writing the research report. So research report writing is controlled in the sense that you need to be extremely careful about what you write, the words you choose, the way ideas are expressed, and the validity and the verifiability of the conclusions you draw in your research report. And this is not the case in other reports. And bear in mind that you must be able to defend whatever you write should anyone challenge your findings. So this is why the research report is different from the other reports. So we need to follow a particular template, and we need to defend our evidences which we presented in our research report. So this is very important part of your the research report. That is why the research report is typically different from the reports of other subjects. So we need to follow a particular template. Now I will discuss the template. First of all, the research report begins with a title page. The title of the research report permits potential readers to obtain a first idea of your study and to decide whether they want to read your report in its entirety. For this reason, you may decide to come up with a descriptive title that accurately reflects the content of your research report. So your descriptive title should accurately reflect the contents of your report. Uh, a good title also grabs attention and entices people to read the research report. Typically, a title length shall not be more than 20 words. So you have 20 words to accurately describe the contents of your research report. So a title page should typically look like this. Your title of your research report in 20 words, your name, your section, your student ID, and at the end of your title page, you need to mention your total words, the total words in your research report, excluding table of contents, title page, appendix, and abstract. So if you exclude the word count of these four elements of your research report, what would be your total words? Typically, I would like your total words of your research report to be between 5,000 to 7,000 words, including references and tables, everything. Okay, but if you exclude these elements like table of content, like title page, like appendix and abstract, your length of your research report, the total words of your research report should be between 5,000 to 7,000 words. So please keep this in mind. Okay, so typically your title page of your research report look like this. After your title page, an abstract of your research report is placed on the page immediately following the title page. For some reports, you require to write executive summary. Uh, Executive summary is used when you have conducted an applied research. But in case of the basic research, will almost all students have conducted in this semester, we need to write an abstract. So the abstract is a brief account of the entire research study, and it answers following five questions. The first question abstract answer is the purpose of your research. It answers the question, why have you conducted the research? Second part of the abstract is methodology. It answers how you have conducted the research. So you don't need to explain, in detail. Why? Because the limit of abstract is between 150 to 200 words. So you cannot write, things in detail. You just need to summarize the important points of your abstract. So what is the purpose of your research? It should not be more than one or two lines. How have you conducted the research? Again, it should not be more than one or two lines. Findings. It answers the question, what have you found in your research? Typically, your hypothesis, The results of your hypothesis are written in the findings section. Novelty, it answers the question that how your research effort is different from other efforts on the topics. Again, a very brief one or two statements should be written in the novelty section. Lastly, implications. It answers the question how other researchers and industry can get benefit from your research. Overall, your abstract limit is between 150 to 200 words. Please keep this in mind. You don't have to write a very long abstract. Your abstract should have these, sections. That is why we call it a structured abstract. Unstructured abstract is the one which does not have these sections and it is written in the form of a paragraph. So you should have these sections, and this is called as a structured abstract, and the limit is 150 to 200 words. Please do not cross this limit. Lastly, at the end of your abstract, you need to write keywords. Now, the keywords should not be more than six, and keywords usually are your variables of research that you show in your theoretical framework or population groups of your research. So, keywords are basically those words which other researchers or other readers will use to find your research on internet, find your research on Google Scholar. So, you should write those words, those keywords which identify your research report. So that is why the keywords are very important. So the most important words in your research report, which are your variables, which are your research strategy, which can be your population groups. These are the keywords which you can write. But remember that the limit of keywords is six only. You should not have more than six keywords. Okay. So after writing the abstract, the table of content follow immediately. So table of content is basically the arrangement of different components of the work. For the readers, the table of content serve as a guide through your research report. The table of content usually lists the important headings and subheadings in the report with page references. So you need to keep in mind that in the table of content, you also need to provide a list of tables which you have written, which you have presented in your research report. Because in the results section, in the analysis section, you will have plenty of tables. Maybe they can be 10 tables, 15 tables. So you need to have a separate list of tables. Also, you need to have a separate list of figures. Okay, so a separate list of figures. The most important figure in your research report is your theoretical framework. So you also need to have a separate list of figures. So a table of content should have a reference of your headings and subheadings in your research report, a separate list of tables which should show the total number of tables, the name of those tables, and the page numbers of those tables. It should be presented in the table of contents as well. A separate list of figures also be listed in the table of contents. So you need these three information in your table of content: the headings and subheadings in your research report, number one; number two, a separate list of tables; number three, a separate list of figures in your research report. So these are the three requirements in your research report before you begin actually writing your research report. So title page is number one. Number two, your abstract, the structured abstract. We have just discussed this, and the table of contents. Now, after these three important elements, you will actually start writing your research report. So, the first section of your research report is your introduction section. Put simply, the introduction section should answer the question why you choose that topic for research, why it is important, why you adopted a particular method or approach, and so on. So, you can also think of the introduction as the section that points out the gap in the knowledge that the rest of the paper will fill, or the section in which you define and claim your territory within the broad area of research. So introduction section has these six subsections. So you need to divide your introduction section into these six subsections. Basically, your introduction section has, you can borrow it from your assignment number one. So your assignment number one was focused upon writing the introduction section of your research report. Now you can realize that all the things now come together because your assignment number one focused on writing the introduction section. Your assignment number two, it was focused on writing your literature review. Your assignment number three was more focused on writing the methodology section of your research report. So now you can put all the things together which you have done in your semester so far. So all those things which you have done so far can be put together in the form of research report. Of course, you need to revise some elements of your assignments. I gave you feedback, and if some elements of your previous assignments were not, properly written, you need to revise them. But this is where you can borrow this is where your previous assignments can come handy, can become very helpful in writing your research report. So your introduction section has 6 parts. The first part of your introduction section will provide us with, will introduce the readers with the brief background of the research. It prepares the readers for more detailed and specific information that is given later. In the problem statement, the authors are moving towards presenting the specific topic of their research. In this part, you can bring in some statistics to show the importance of the topic or the seriousness of the problem which you are investigating. In scope of the study section, you need to focus on three important elements in this section. The scope of the study, the first important part of the scope of the study is basically the significance of your research. The significance of your research can be discussed from managerial angle, how your research can help the organizations, how your research can be it can help the managers, how it can help the professionals. It can also You can also discuss how your scholarly contribution can add to the existing knowledge. So you can also discuss how your research can be significant for existing knowledge in that area. Lastly, you also need to set boundaries for your research. The boundaries for your research, this is also a part of your scope. What is boundary? Boundary means that maybe you are focusing upon a certain population group, like you may be focusing on students, you may be focusing on younger population. So now you are limitizing you're setting a boundary of your research, that the focus of your research is on the students. So the results may not be applicable to the other portions of the other part of the population. If your focus is on the rural customers, you also need to mention it here that the focus would be on the rural customers. So all the boundaries which you set in your research report, they need to be discussed here. So the scope of the study, first of all, it needs to discuss the significance of your research for organizations, for managers, for professionals. Secondly, it needs to discuss the significance of your research for the researchers, the knowledge, what is the scholarly contribution of your research. And lastly, you need to tell us about the boundaries of your research, that which population group or which industry you are focusing upon. Uh, we need to know this all this information in the scope of the study part of the introduction section. Fourth part is the novelty of your research. We have discussed this previously as well. It is appropriate to indicate any earlier relevant research on the same topic and clarify how your research differed from those earlier attempts. Uh, Now, in the section 1.5, you will conclude the introduction section by mentioning the specific objectives of your research. So the earlier paragraphs would should lead logically to specific objectives of your study. Note that this part of the introduction section gives specific details, that what are your objectives of your research. Usually these objectives, they are basically your hypothesis. So basically your hypothesis should be transformed in the form of objectives in this particular section 1.5. Now, you also need to be very careful that uh, avoid giving too much details in the introduction section, because literature review section will cover the topic in detail. So that is why I have put a limit to the length of your introduction section. The length of your introduction section should be between 900 to 1000 words. So this is the limit you need to work with. The last part of your introduction section discusses about the structure and division of chapters in the research report. So now in the last part of your introduction section, you will just tell your readers that what is the structure of your research report, how many chapters you have in your research report, and what is discussed in each chapter. For instance, you will discuss that in the introduction section. We have set the context of the study. We have discussed the background of the study. In the literature review, we have discussed this section. So basically, in the structure part, you will discuss the headings and subheadings of your research report. So all the headings and subheadings of your research report can be discussed in the 1.6 section of your introductions. If your subheadings are a lot, you need to mention only the main subheadings, okay? Because I know your headings are only three or four, like your headings are introduction, literature review, methodology, discussion section, implication, conclusion. These are the main headings of your research report. But if you have more subheadings, please discuss only the major subheadings in your research report in 1.6 section. Okay, so this is the introduction section of your research report. You need to divide this section into six parts, and the information about this section is already available to you in your AS1. So you can borrow the information from your AS1 and put that information in the relevant, sections of the introduction. Okay, so yes, you can copy, you can paste it, but if there is any revision made by you, if you want to improve your, research introduction section, you need to make some changes in the AS1 if there is a requirement for improvement. So this is the first section of your introduction, the research report. The second section, we have discussed this in detail in our AS2 as well. We discussed that the typical literature review template is that you need to divide your literature review to different parts on the basis of relationship between variables explained by theoretical perspectives. So for instance, it is just an example that if your theoretical framework looks like this, so in this particular theoretical framework, we have four relationships. The first relationship is between IV and DV. The second relationship is between IV and mediating variable. The third relationship is between mediating variable and dependent variable. And the fourth relationship is the role of mediating variable in the relationship between IV and DV. So you have four relationships in your theoretical framework. So you need to divide your literature review into four different sections as well. So the number of relationships that are stipulated in your theoretical framework should guide you in making different sections of your literature review. For instance, in this particular example, we have four sections of our literature review. Okay, so the number of relationships that are shown in your literature review must guide your, the number of relationships shown in your theoretical framework must guide your literature review. So if you have three relationships, your literature review section should have three, subsections. So this is what we discussed in our AS2 as well. So each section of your literature review, it should be divided into three paragraphs. Please follow this template. In the first paragraph, you need to define the variables on the basis of previous operationalizations. In the second para, you need to discuss the possible relationship that you expect to exist between the variables, give arguments why you expect this relationship to exist on the basis of theoretical linkages with previous research in mind. And in the third paragraph, you need to conclude the arguments made in the first and second paragraphs and state your hypothesis and the end separately. Please state your hypothesis separately in the bold format because in your AS2 it was very difficult for me to find your hypothesis because the hypothesis was written somewhere in the third paragraph. So please state your hypothesis separately. So you can borrow the section number 2 from your AS2 The literature review section was, the part of your assignment number two. So you need to borrow your literature review from assignment number two. If there were any recommendations from my side to improve your literature review, please incorporate those changes in the final report, because if you are making the same mistake which you made in writing your AS2, your marks will be deducted on the same basis. So that is why in your final report, if there were any modifications, if there were any suggestions from my side to improve your AS2, then please improvise your literature review section and improve it, and incorporate a better version of your literature review in this particular section. So you can borrow it from your AS2. There will be no problem of plagiarism. I will discuss this issue at the end of this presentation, the plagiarism issue. Okay, so this is the second part of your research report. The third part of your research report is the methodology section, and you have already discussed this thing in your AS3, because in AS3 our focus was on writing the research proposal and becoming clear about these particular subsections. So you can also borrow your methodology section from your AS3, but the presentation of information in the final research report is like this. In the first part, you need to discuss your research strategy. So you need to discuss either you are using survey strategy or experimental strategy. Are you using primary data or secondary data? What is the time horizon of your research? And you need to justify each choice. For instance, if you're using experimental method, if you're using qualitative method, you need to justify your choice. If you're using secondary data, you need to justify that why you are not able to conduct same study by utilizing primary data. If you are using cross-sectional research, you need to justify your time horizon of your research as well. So the first section of your methodology is your research strategy. So you need to discuss, you need to mention categorically that kind of study you are going to conduct for your solving your research problem. The second part of your methodology is becoming very clear about your unit of analysis. Tell us about your population, what is your population, and what is your sample. Your population may be young group, the youth. Your population may be younger population, the younger stratas of the population, but your sample may be students. So you need to justify this choice, that why you have chosen your sample from, for instance, students. I know that majority of you have collected data from WKU students. So you need to justify that why students are appropriate sample to study the population which you are focusing in your research report. The third part is your data collection method. You need to discuss why you have chosen online method or face-to-face method. Justify this choice. You can give reasons that it is an efficient method. You can collect data from different population. Cross-sectional study can be conducted. Your data can become your data can be collected in an efficient manner, in a rapid manner. So you need to give us reasons. You need to give us justifications that why you believe that online method was a very good method for collecting data. The fourth one is your sampling strategy. You need to justify that either you are using probability sampling method or non-probability sampling method. You need to justify this choice as well. For instance, if you are using purposive sampling, you need to justify why you have chosen purposive sampling for your research. Or if you have chosen systematic sampling, you have to justify this choice as well. Research instrumentation, very important part. So the sources from where questions were taken from, you need to discuss this categorically. You need to mention those sources. What were the scales used? For instance, this is a very important thing, because you now realize that the scale type has a direct impact on the kind of statistical test you will run. Because if your IV is not being measured on an interval scale, we cannot use regression analysis. We need to use any other statistical test like ANOVA or t-test. So it is very important for you to discuss the scales which were used to measure each variable, and the questions which were used to measure each variable. and you need to justify this choice as well, that why you have chosen questions from one particular research paper and why you have not chosen questions from another research paper. So you need to justify this choice as well. Remember that in one of our discussion question activity, the question was that you need to justify the job satisfaction research instrument, the job satisfaction scale. And there were plenty of different scales available to measure job satisfaction. There were different questions to measure job satisfaction, and you needed to justify your choice, that why you chose one method, one questionnaire over another. Sorry. So lastly, you need to discuss about the analytical methods that were used. So which method was used to test your hypothesis? I discussed that you can use t-test, you can use ANOVA test, you can use regression test to test check your hypothesis. So you need to mention that which tests were used to to test your hypothesis and determine the validity and the reliability of your data. And if you're using secondary data, you need to mention the heteroscedasticity and the multicollinearity of your data, how these issues were addressed in your research report. Okay, so you can borrow the methodology section from your assignment number three. Your assignment number three focused on the methodology section, so you can borrow the information from there, and you can refer to the feedback that was given to you. If the feedback was not very good, you need to revise your AS3 and then incorporate that information in your research report. So please keep in mind that you don't have to cut paste your previous assignments in these sections if your feedback was not very positive. If the feedback was good enough, then you can simply put information in these particular sections. So please keep in mind that your research report must be the improved version of your assignment. It must be a better version of your assignments. It should not be the same version. If your assignments were very good, they were graded very good, then you can simply cut paste the information in these sections. But if there were some reduction in points, please improve your these sections. So these are the first three sections that were covered by your first three assignments. But now these sections, the section number four, this is not covered in any of your assignment. Although we have discussed this in one of our discussion question activity, but this is not covered in any of your assignments. So you have to write these sections, from your own perspective. You have to write these sections from start. Okay, the result section. The result section is divided into four subsections. So please, I think it is 4.2. So you need to keep this in mind, that your result sections must be divided into these four subsections. So we discussed this in our analysis analysis lectures, that first of all, your result section starts from sample characteristics. So you need to insert a table here. The table will give us information about your sample. You need to explain your sample composition. What is the ratio of male female? What are the different age proportions in your sample? What are the different professional proportions in your sample, depending upon the personal information which you gathered from your survey. So this is a very important part. The first part of your result section is your sample characteristics. So you need to tell us in detail, you need to explain the sample composition of your research study. The second part is checking for validity and reliability. Please refer to our unit number 11 and unit number 12 recordings, that how to run factor analysis, and you need to construct the factor analysis table as well. Now that table was very different, because when we constructed that table, we followed a particular template. Please follow that template, because that table was very comprehensive. It contain information about the factor loadings. It contain information about the reliability. It contain information about the variance. It contain information about the questions in your questionnaire. So please follow that table while constructing, while attempting this particular section, the 4.2 section of your results. Interpret the table as well. We discussed in our unit number 12 how to interpret the table. Please refer to that section. Please refer to that recording about how to interpret the table. And please mention the questions which were deleted. What was the total number of questions? How many questions were deleted? Which questions were deleted? So you need to mention these particular points in the section 4.2 of your results. Second 4.3 is checking for normality. Again, you need to insert a table here and interpret the table that, why there was no normality concerns. And if there were normality concerns, which questions were deleted. You need to mention the skewness values and the kurtosis values in your tables. And, you just interpret them that all the values are following the ranges or the values which were stipulated by the authors. I also gave you the reference of those authors which were who gave us the criteria of checking for normality. I think one was Hare et al. And another one was I can't recall. So you also need to mention those authors whose criteria we are using to discuss the normality. So please insert those tables there and interpret those tables and mention the question if any question is deleted. So then comes the section 4.4, very, very important section of your research report, hypothesis testing. So you need to make a very obvious heading, a small subheading. The name of the heading would be testing hypothesis one. State your hypothesis there. Okay, so you need to state your hypothesis because I don't want to go back to the literature review section and read your hypothesis, that what were your hypotheses. Okay, so you need to mention your hypothesis again here. The heading would be testing hypothesis one. In brackets you can write the hypothesis, the statement of the hypothesis, then you can paste the tables and then interpret the table and just categorically tell us that whether the relationship is significant or not. Remember that you don't need to interpret the findings at this moment. For instance, if you have put if you have checked the differences between males and females, and your t-test was conducted and the t-test is significant, which shows that there are differences between males and females. Okay, so you just need to write this thing, that there are differences between male and female, because the mean of the male is higher or mean of the females is higher and the value of the p is lesser than 0.05, etc., etc. That's it. But you don't need to justify your results here. Okay, this is a research report. A research report needs to follow a particular template. You don't need to justify your results here because the result justification will be done in the discussion section. Why there are differences between males and females with respect to luxury consumption, you will discuss this thing in the discussion section. In the hypothesis testing section of your result, just you will tell us categorically whether your hypotheses are accepted or not, and what are the basis of rejecting or accepting your hypothesis. So if your hypothesis, if your p-value is lesser than 0.05, your hypothesis is accepted, your beta coefficient is this, it means this, and your r square value is this, it means this. That's it. So you need to interpret the statistical values only. You don't need to interpret your findings, that why there are differences between male and female, why your IV is causing a positive change in your DV. You don't need to interpret this. Okay, so in your hypothesis testing, just paste the tables and interpret whether your hypothesis is accepting or it is being rejected. And in the discussion section, then we will discuss why our hypothesis is getting accepted or why our hypothesis is not accepted. Okay, so this is very important for you, that your result section will have these four subsections: sample characteristics, checking for validity, checking for normality, and testing for hypothesis. That's it. So you just need to categorically mention here that your hypotheses are accepted or rejected. What is the p-value? What is the beta coefficient value? What is the mean value? What is the r-square value? That's it. You don't need to justify the results in this section. The results will be justified in your next section. So I will take a break here. Any questions so far? Anything which is not clear? Any question? Anything which is not clear so far? How many words? I will discuss this at the end of my presentation. The word limit for each section. The word limit for each section will be discussed at the end of the presentation. The word limit will be discussed here. Yeah, this is the word limit. Okay, so you will have a word limit for each section here. Okay, don't worry. So I have that information at the end. Okay, now we will discuss the discussion section, the most important part of your research report. Okay, so the purpose of the discussion section is to interpret the significance of your findings in light of what was already known about the research problem being investigated and to explain any new understanding or new insights that emerged as a result of your research. So the discussion will always, it will always focus on interpreting the significance of your findings, interpreting your findings. So the discussion section clearly explains how your study advanced the reader's understanding of the research problem. But the discussion section does not simply repeat or rearrange the first parts of your paper. So the contents of the discussion section is like this. So you need to write the discussion section in this particular format. So these are the four important elements of your discussion section. The first important part of your discussion section is reiterating your research problem and stating the major findings. So you will begin writing your discussion section by briefly reiterating the research problem or the problems you are investigating, then move quickly to describe the major findings of the study. You should write a direct, declarative, and brief, findings of the study results, usually in one paragraph. Now, when you begin writing your research report, you also wrote research problem at the beginning of at in the introduction section, right? You wrote research problem in the introduction section, but at that time you were not clear about your results. You were not clear about whether your hypotheses were being accepted or rejected at that time. In the introduction section, you were not clear about your results. So because you did not collect data, you did not test your hypothesis. So at that particular time, your results were not clear. But now your results are clear. Okay. So now in the discussion section, you will connect these two important, points, that how your research problem and your findings are related to each other. Okay, so for instance, if you were discussing the luxury consumption in China, so luxury consumption in China is increasing each year. The luxury consumption in China is on it has an upward trend, and you discuss the luxury consumption among students. For instance, your one of the main finding was that the female students, they have a higher tendency uh, for luxury consumption as compared to the male students. So this is something which is your finding. How you will how you will relate this finding with your research problem. Your research problem was the luxury consumption in China. So you can say that the overall the income it is increasing in China. So that is why the luxury consumption is more. But now your major finding is that females, they are more, they have a more tendency towards consuming luxury products as compared to the males. So how you will fit this finding with your research problem? So this is the first section of your discussion, where you will revisit your research problem and try to relate it with your major findings of your research. So this is a very, very important part. Usually you need to write just one paragraph for this first section. Okay. The second section is again very important. It means you need to explain the meaning of your findings and why they are important. So consider the likelihood that no one has thought as long and hard about your study as you have. So you need to systematically explain the underlying meaning of your findings and state why you believe they are significant. So after reading this discussion section, you want the reader to critically think about the results. You don't want to force the reader to go through the paper multiple times to figure out what all means, what your research all means. So this is a very important part. For instance, if you have discussed the luxury consumption, the topic of luxury consumption, now you can discuss that why there is a difference between males and females with respect to the luxury consumption. Why females have a higher tendency for luxury consumption. Now you will try to justify your results. This is the section where your justification will be done. So instead of justifying your results in the hypothesis testing part, where you will interpret your tables, this is the part where you will justify your results, that why males have a lower tendency to consume luxury products as compared to females. Whatever your test results are, whatever your hypotheses are, this is the part where you will try to justify your results. And I will also try to relate section number 2 and section number 4 with each other. So the section number 2 is, you will try to justify your results, you will try to interpret your findings, and in the section number 4 is considering alternative explanations of your findings. It is important to remember that the purpose of research is in the social sciences or in the management sciences is to discover. And unlike natural sciences, our focus is not to prove anything. So, when writing the discussion section, you should carefully consider all possible explanations for the study result, rather than just those that fit your hypothesis or prior assumptions and biases. This is especially important when describing the discovery of significant or unanticipated findings. So now you have realized that many of your hypotheses, they are not accepted. Why they are not accepted? This is an unanticipated finding for you. So these are the sections, the section number 2 and section number 4 of your discussion. You need to discuss that why your hypotheses were not accepted. What were the reasons for for getting your hypothesis rejected? Why your hypotheses were rejected? It means that you did not have sufficient solid ground for understanding the phenomena which you were studying. That is why your assumptions were rejected. That is why your hypotheses were rejected. So you need to discuss this thing in detail, that okay, your hypotheses are accepted. So you need to justify that why you believe that relationship exists between variables, but your hypotheses are also rejected. Now you also need to discuss that why you believe that your hypotheses are rejected. Sometimes when your hypotheses are accepted, you need to focus on some alternative explanations as well. What do I mean by alternative explanation? Let me give you an example. uh, for instance, your finding is that female students are more inclined towards luxury consumption as compared to the male students. Now, this could be attributed to the differences in gender, okay? But there could be other alternative explanations that why female students are more prone towards luxury consumption as compared to the male students. It may be because they relate their consumption habits more with their self concept as compared to the males. When consumption makes an important part of their self concept and defines them, who they are, the attitude towards luxury consumption changes. So you should always look for providing alternative explanations for your findings by thinking long and hard about research problem in action. Sorry. So so you need to provide alternative explanations for your findings as well. This is what discussion section does as well. The part number 3 of discussion section is very, very important as well. In the part number 3, you need to relate the findings of similar studies. So, no study in the social sciences or management sciences is so novel or possesses such a restricted focus that it has absolutely no relation to previously published research. The discussion section should relate your results to those found in other studies, particularly if questions raised from prior studies served as the motivation for your research. So this is important because comparing and contrasting the findings of other studies helps to support the overall importance of your results, and it highlights how and in what ways your study differs from other research about the topic. So it is very important that in this particular section, the third section of your discussion section, uh, you need to position your research with other research papers that who discussed which discuss the same topic. For instance, when you are discussing about luxury consumption, there may be other research papers which have also focused on luxury consumption, and those papers have found that females are more prone to luxury consumption. So you will just mention those papers, and you will write that how your results have already been confirmed by other researchers. So, so it is a good thing that you are adding one more evidence. You're adding one more evidence to the already acceptable, phenomena. Or there could be some other research papers where there is a finding that males are more prone towards luxury consumption as compared to the females. So you will mention those papers and you will contrast your findings with those findings. So in this particular section, the third section of your discussion, you need to compare and contrast the findings of other researchers on the similar topic. So this will help us contextualize your research findings in the broader aspect. So this is very important for you to understand that the discussion section is about comparing and contrasting your findings manner. Do not make headings in the discussion section like other sections. So you need to write, 4 paragraphs in discussion section. They could be small paragraphs. So you don't have to write headings here. You don't need to make headings in the discussion section. So this is very important that your thoughts are arranged in this manner. Um, you know, you can merge part number 2 and 4, but usually your discussion section should have 3 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs in the same thought manner, in the same sequence. What you should avoid in the discussion section: do not over interpret the results. This is very important, that in the discussion section, you don't have to over interpret the result. Interpretation is a subjective exercise. As such, you should always approach the selection and interpretation of your findings very intelligently, very smartly. So you don't have to introduce any biasness to your interpretation. For instance, if you take into consideration the trade war between USA and China, and if you're doing research on the tendency of Chinese consumers to buy American products, and you find out that there is a low tendency among Chinese consumers to buy American products. So you don't have to overinterpret it that it is because of expected war between USA and China, the World War III between USA and China. This would be over interpretation. So you just need to interpret the results within your boundaries, within the acceptable, norms, within the acceptable, understanding. So you don't have to over interpret your results. Secondly, do not repeat what is already written in the previous sections of your research report. Okay, this is very, very important. Do not waste time restating your results. Simply copying the results and pasting them in your discussion is not nice. So look for different ways to express or report your findings. Simply copying something from your research problem, from objectives of research, from novelty section of your research report, and findings section of your research report, and pasting them and arranging them together does not convey a good scholarly impression to the reader. So please avoid copying from previous sections in your discussion section. Thirdly, you don't have to introduce new results in your discussion section. All the results should be mentioned here in the hypothesis testing. Okay, no new results should be included here. So if all the hypotheses are tested here, all the hypotheses should be mentioned in the hypothesis testing part. So you don't have to include any new results. It is not possible that you do not test your hypothesis 4 and you mention the hypothesis 4 here in the discussion section. It is not viable. It is not doable. So this is your discussion section. Please arrange your thoughts in this sequence, and please avoid doing this particular thing. Please, especially this, do not overinterpret your results. Do not repeat what has already been written in the previous section. So this is the section number 5 of your research report. Section number 6, conclusions. So, conclusion is basically presenting the last word on the issues you raised in your paper. So, just as the introduction gives a first impression to your reader, the conclusion offers a chance to leave a lasting impression. So, do this by highlighting the key points in your analysis or findings. So the function of your conclusion is to restate the main argument of your research. So it reminds the readers of the strength of your main arguments and reiterates the most important evidence supporting those arguments. So make sure that your conclusion is not simply a repetitive summary of your discussion section, because this reduces the impact of the arguments you have developed in your report. So the conclusion section, it basically connect the readers with your objectives. Remember that you posed objectives in the beginning of your research report in the introduction section. So you just try to give answers that whether your research objectives were fulfilled or not. Just restate that how those research objectives were fulfilled, and you need to relate them with the findings of your research report. Be concise in the conclusion section. The conclusion section should be concise and to the point. Conclusions that are too long have unnecessary detail. So the conclusion section is not the place for details about your methodology, about results. So you don't have to discuss about the methodology used by you, by the literature review. So you don't have to present the you know the summary of whole report in the conclusion section. You just need to focus on relating your research objectives with your findings in your conclusion section. That's it. If you have 3 research objectives, just discuss that how your findings have fulfilled these 3 research objectives. So that is why you have to be very concise in your conclusion, and the conclusion word limit is very less. It is like around 400 to 600 words. So you don't have lot of time, you don't have lot of space, you don't have lots of words to explain your whole research report. So just need to focus on this important point, how your research objectives are fulfilled by the findings of your research report. Okay, after conclusion section, how to write the conclusion section, very important way. So usually a conclusion section can be, one paragraph or two paragraphs. You start writing the conclusion with fresh rephrasing of your problem statement or your objectives. I would say, you can choose either of these two. You can choose problem statement. You can choose research objectives. Rephrase your research objectives and discuss that whether your research objectives were fulfilled by the main findings of your research report. That's it. Rephrase your research objectives and then follow it up with the main findings of your research report. Uh, Provide the final words whether your research objectives were fulfilled or not, and if they were not fulfilled, why they were not fulfilled. If they were fulfilled, just provide a sense of closure to your report. That's it. So the main part of your conclusion is that rephrase your research objectives and follow your research objectives with the main findings of your research report. That's it. And just explain that how your objectives are fulfilled by your findings or not fulfilled by your findings of the report. That's it. So this is how you will write the conclusion section. The conclusion section is followed up by the implication section. Again, a very important part of your research report. So you have conducted an extensive research project. The results must mean something or they must be significant to someone. This is where your implications come in. Implication contain the effect that your research may have on future research or policy decisions or on the appropriate field of your research. So we have two sections in our implication, two subsections in our implication section, the theoretical implications and the managerial implications. So the theoretical implications answer how previous similar studies have advanced your field and how your study can add to that. In other words, theoretical implications are your scholarly contributions. So if you tested a theory in your study, then you want to discuss the theoretical implications of your study. If your study supported the theory you tested, a theoretical implication would be that the theory is suitable for explaining and understanding the phenomena you investigated, or the theory may be suitable for studying the specific population you studied. So, if researchers have not applied the theory to the population or setting they studied, a theoretical implication would be that your study may serve as a basis for studying a particular theory or modifying a particular theory. So it is very important that you discuss this part in your theoretical implication. In short, the scholarly contributions your research make towards the relevant existing body of knowledge is covered in theoretical implications part. The managerial implication answers how the results of your study can be helpful to organizations, policymakers, and managers. Implications for practice involve discussing what your findings might mean for individuals or organizations who work in your field of study. So think about what people do in your field, what might your findings mean for them and the work they do. How can your findings potentially affect their work? How can your findings potentially affect the policy making? So this is what is reiterated in the managerial implications sections. Section number 8 is about your limitations. Uh, you know, limitations, every study has limitations. Study limitations can exist due to constraint on research design or methodology, and these factors may impact the findings of your study. So, why do we need to include limitations in our research? Although limitation address the potential weakness of a study, writing about them towards the end of your paper actually strengthens your study by identifying any problems before researchers or readers find them. So, furthermore, pointing out study limitations shows that you have considered the impact of research weakness thoroughly and have an in depth understanding of your research topic. So, since all studies face limitations, being honest about it and telling about your limitations will do good for your research report. So there can be two sources of limitations: the methodological limitations and the limitations attributed to the researchers. The methodological limitations could be about your sampling method, you know, sampling error occurs when a non-probability sampling method is used to select a sample, and that sample does not reflect the general population or appropriate population concerned. So this results in limitations for your study known as sample bias or selection bias. So it is good to acknowledge this limitation. It is okay to acknowledge that your results may not be generalizable to the other stratas of society due to sampling method used. Uh, the limitation could be due to the data collection method. Some data collection methods, like online questionnaires, may not be appropriate in getting representative sample participants. So, due to low response rate, you might not get representative population, or due to certain data collection method like online survey, a certain set of population like young people are more, or overrepresented in the sample as compared to the other stratas of society. So you can also consider this as a limitation. Sampling size can also be a limitation for you. Insufficient sample size can be a limitation for statistical measurement. So it is important to have a sufficient sample size in order to conclude a valid research result. The larger the sample, the more precise your results will be. So if your sample size is not large, the generalizations may be difficult to make. It could also be related to your population. Your population is very, limited. Your population does not, you have only focused on students. So it means that your sample was not representative of all the population groups in the society. So this could also be your one of the limitations. There are some limitations which are attributed to the researchers, like time constraints. The time available to study a research problem and to measure change over time is constrained by the deadline of your assignment. So first of all, make sure that you choose a research problem that you will be able to complete well before the assignment's deadline. So if time constraints negatively impacted your study in any way, it is good to acknowledge it. Limited access to data is again a very important limitation. If your research involved surveying certain people or organizations, you might have faced the problem of having limited access to these respondents. So, due to this limited access, you might need to, rethink about your research problem because the quality of the responses was not that good. So, due to this, your study results can be compromised. So, you need to mention it. There can be budget constraints as well. Very, very important because research can be very expensive. It is important for researchers to acknowledge that research plan was confined within a limited budget. A limited budget means that you don't have enough funds at your disposal to run experiments or to conduct a large cross-sectional study or to hire data collection agency to collect data for you or to pay at mturk to get responses. So this could be limitations as well. Typically, limitation begins with this opening sentence that there may be some possible limitations in this study. That this research, however, is subject to several limitations. The finding of this research are qualified by limitations in research design. So these are, some of the ways in which you can begin, in which you can open your limitation section. And then you can go on to describe each limitation, explain why is this a limitation so readers can understand easily that this is a limitation. The ninth section of your research report is future research directions. Very important part again. So in this particular section, you need to introduce possible new or expanded ways of thinking about your research problem. Okay, what does this mean? So it means that within when you start doing your research, when you start when you begin your research, you were not very clear about some of the research problems that you face. Now in this particular section, if other researchers want to do research on the similar topic, what suggestions would provide them? This is what you need to do at this particular section. So you need to suggest other researchers that what they should do in in the future research if they plan to do research on the same topic or the similar research problem. First way is to introduce expanded ways of thinking about the research problem. So maybe, for instance, when you think of when we were discussing about the luxury consumption, for instance, you find out that the luxury consumption it should be studied with respect to the differences in personality traits. So basically, the luxury consumption is a function of a personality. It is not a function of income, because there are some people who have lot of income but they are still not going for luxury consumption. So this is something which came to your mind when you were doing your research, but because you already collected data, it was not possible for you to introduce new variable at that point of time. So this is the point where you can suggest other researchers that personality can also be one of the variables to study luxury consumption, because there are some personality traits which are more prone towards luxury consumption as compared to the other personality traits. So luxury consumption is not simply a function of income. So this is how you can, you can introduce some expanded ways of thinking about your research problem, and you can suggest your other researchers who are doing research on the same topic in the future. You can give suggestions to them. Secondly, you can convert your limitations to your future research directions. For instance, if you have faced limitation in terms of your sampling method, if you have chosen a convenient sampling method, you can suggest other researchers that they can choose a probability sampling method in doing research. If your data collection method was online, you can suggest other researchers that they can conduct face-to-face research. If your research was quantitative in nature, you use survey method, you can suggest other researchers that maybe doing a qualitative research, maybe doing interviews can give a very good results, can give us deeper understanding of the phenomena. If your sampling size was not large, you can, suggest the researchers, other researchers, that they need to study the same phenomena with large sample size. If your focus was on younger population, you can suggest other researchers that they can focus on, on other population groups as well. So one way to write your future research direction is to convert your limitations, into your suggestions for future researchers. So whatever your limitations are, you can convert these limitations and suggest other researchers that they can, in their research, they can, think about, covering these limitations, and they can overcome these limitations by suggesting them that they need what they need to do. Okay, so this is also a very important part of your research. Lastly, the references. Now, I need to discuss this in detail as well, because references are of two types. First of all, they are in-text references, which are called as in-text citation. In-text citation are the references which you mention in your research report, like when you're writing literature review, when you're writing introduction section, when you're writing methodology section or discussion section. The references in that particular in those particular sections, they are called as in-text citations. Okay, and then there are references at the end of your research report, like they are bibliographic references, like they are the references which are found at the end of your research report. So there are two types of references. Now let me try to give you the some details about the in-text citations. The in-text citations, they generally follow two styles. First style is that author surname and year comes first, and it is followed by the findings of those authors. The second style is that the findings come first and the author's surname and year it comes later. For instance, in this particular paragraph, we have used this reference. Hong 2014 refers to this as education diplomacy, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so in this particular example, we are using this particular style. The author name is mentioned first, the year comes in the bracket, and then we have discussed the finding. So when finding is very important, okay, when finding is very important, we use this particular style, because we need to tell our readers about the the author as well. So when finding is very important, we name our author. We don't need to write the author name in the brackets. But when finding is not that important, we can follow the second style. Like for in this particular case, scholarly research has established that study abroad experiences render international students deeply affected by their host country values, etc., etc. And this is said by this particular author. So when the findings are just, you know, confirmation of other researchers' results or other researchers' work, we can use the second style. So remember the differences between these two styles. If you're using the first style, the author name is not written in bracket. The year is written in the bracket. If you are following the second style, both the author name and the year they are written within the bracket. So when to use the first style? When you want to give some very important information. Okay, so when you want to give some very important information, you can use the first style. Okay, so basically you're saying that the author name is mentioned, categorically. It is very author name is made very obvious. Okay, so when the finding is not that important, but it is relevant, still the author names and year is written at the end of the finding, and they are written in the bracket. So this is something which I noticed in your previous assignments as well. Please rectify this mistake in your final research report. And another thing which you need to focus is the how to make in-text citations when your number of authors are different. If you have four authors, okay, if four authors have written a research paper and you want to cite these in your text, in your research report, in the body of your research report, use the surname of all the authors only when citing for the first time. So when there are four authors, use the surname of all the authors when citing for the first time. For instance, these are the authors, they are the surnames of the authors. Uh, so we need to use them. We need to use all the authors' surnames when citing for the first time. But in the subsequent citations, we can only use the surname of the first author followed by et al. Like if I'm using Yuan, Lo, Chu, and Wong 2018 research for the first time, I'm citing them in my report for the first time. I will use their name. I will use all of their names. But if I am citing it for the second time in my research report, I will just use the name of the first author, which is Yuan, and I will follow it by et al. And then I will write the year. Okay. So this is very important that if there are four authors, for the first time you will write the name of all the four authors, but for the second time in your research report, if you want to mention their name, you will write the surname of the first author, and it will be followed by et al. Another important thing, if the number of authors are more than four, if the number of authors are more than four, then use this surname of the first author whenever you use it. So this formula, it does not stand. If you have more than four authors, then simply use the surname of the first author and follow it by et al. And the year. Okay. So even if you're using it for the first time or the second time or the third time, if the number of authors are more than four, then simply use the surname of the first author followed by the et al. But if the number of authors are three or less than three, then you need to use the surname of all the authors when citing for the first time or the subsequent citations. So if your number of authors are three or lesser than three, so you need to mention their names. You need to mention all of their names every time you cite them in your research report. So you need to keep this in mind when you are citing. You're making in-text citations. When you are writing references in your bibliography at the end of your research report, please keep in mind that references, they are alphabetically placed. Okay, so the references started from A will come first, and then the references with B will come. So references are placed alphabetically. References must be complete in all the aspect. So the surnames of the authors are mentioned. Okay, it is followed by the year, it is followed by the title of their research paper, it is followed by the name of the journal where it was published, It is followed by the volume of the journal. It is followed by the issue of the journal. It is followed by the page number when the paper was published. Okay, so you need to mention all this information. You can simply gather this information from this particular icon in the Google search, Google Scholar. When you click on this icon, there are different sources, there are different ways to cite. They mention they pop up. So we are following APA style. APA stands for American Psychological Association. We are following APA style, and in APA style, the information is presented here: the title of the paper, the name of the journal, the volume number, the issue number, the page numbers. And if some information is not given here, like page numbers are not given here, it is possible you will simply open the article and you can see the page numbers and you can enter them manually. Of course, if you know how to use EndNote or OneNote in your Word software, you can use those softwares to enter references as well. Okay. Lastly, appendix. Appendix can be, it is uh, you know, it contains supplementary material that is not an essential part of the research report itself, but it may be helpful in providing a more comprehensive understanding of the research problem, or the information is too cumbersome or too lengthy to be included in the body of the research report. Then we can include it in our appendix. You can include questionnaires or survey tools in your appendix. You can include graphs. You can include images of sample characteristics in the appendix. You can also include large tables in your appendix. Or simply, you can choose not to provide appendix. It is up to you. Okay, so appendix is not mandatory, but it is just a supplementary material. You can provide the supplementary material in your appendix. Okay, overall outline of your research report, it is like this. The word limit for introduction section, please follow this word limit, 700 to 1000 words. Literature review section, it has this word limit. Follow this word limit for the methodology section, for your results section, for your discussion section, for your conclusion section, for your implication section, limitation section, and future research direction section are also not very lengthy. They are very short. So the word limit is between 200 to 500 words. References, you need to have at least 25 references. 15 to 25 references, and all the references must be from these papers, SSCI papers or CSSCI papers. These are Chinese papers, ABDC or ABS papers, using APA style references. Of course, if you are not able to find your relevant research in these, index in these directories, in these papers, then you can also use other research papers as well. Okay, so this is the overall outline of your research report. So your overall word limit of your research report must be between 5,000 to 7,000 words, excluding title page, appendix, table of content, and abstract. Okay, so the issue of plagiarism, it is very, very important. The overall plagiarism of research report, inclusive all, shall be below 50%. Uh, there shall be lesser than 10% plagiarism in the sections 4 to 9 of your research report. So what are the sections 4 to 9? Section number 4 to 9. These are the sections. They should not be very much, plagiarized. So the plagiarism limit for these sections is lesser than 10%. For other sections, because these sections, they are directly borrowed from your AS1, AS2, AS3. So for this to incorporate these, borrowing into your research report, we have levied a limitation of 50% plagiarism. So there should be a 50% plagiarism in your research report. This is the limit. Okay, so the our next session would be our last session, where we will conclude our research project, how to publish your research, because our next step would be publishing your research. So you have done lots of hard work to write your research report. Now we will be focusing upon how to publish our research. It will be an open answer question session about any research related query. So I have also extended the date of your AS4 to 17th December. So anything you learn in our next session, it can be incorporated to your, your research report. So the date of your research report is extended to 17th December. So any question about today's session, anything which is not clear, now is the time to discuss it. Anything which is not clear. Okay, so I will discuss the DQ40, this week's DQ activity. You need to read discussion section of academic papers which you selected for your literature review. Why is discussion section an important part of research paper? You need to answer this thing. You can also refer to the recording of today's session and you can get answer from that as well. What information can you extract from discussion section? What is the difference between results section and discussion section? Again, you can refer to the recording of today's session and you can answer this question. Thirdly, what are the important discussion points of your research report? So this is what you will gather from your own research. So you need to discuss that what are the important discussion points of your research report. Select three other student posts and provide feedback for their suggestion. You can evaluate their discussion points. You can evaluate where their differences between result section and discussion section. You can evaluate their interpretation of the discussion section. And the deadline for initial response is 11th December, and deadline for the responses is 13th December. The total mark for this PQ activity is 30 marks. Why? Because I have merged this particular activity here, because this activity was for the next session, but our last session is on 22nd December. It was supposed to be on 22nd December, but I'm sure that you are going on holidays and we don't have sufficient time to check my all these discussion questions. So I have merged this with your DQ14. So this is the deadline of your initial responses, and this is the deadline for your the evaluation responses. This is your DQ14. Your AS4 is due on 17th December. Please keep in mind that the formatting requirements of your AS4, the line spacing, the APA format, and the format of the report which is discussed in today's session. Lastly, please focus on your course evaluations, your section number one. Please go to this link and evaluate your course. Make your course evaluations, because we need at least 75% responses in our course evaluations in order to consider it a valid response. That's it. So this is the agenda. This is it for today's session. Any question which is not clear? Anything which requires further explanation? Yes, this is the template for your AS4. This whole PPT, today's lecture is actually a template for your AS4. So in today's lecture, we have discussed how to write your AS4. So everything in today's lecture is about your AS4. This is actually the template. This whole lecture was actually explanation of the template. Hmm. So please follow this template, this format which is discussed in today's session. Anything which is not clear? Any other question? Any question, anything which requires further explanation? Okay, so please go to this link and make the valuations. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your patience. And if any question pops up in your mind, please don't hesitate. You can simply ask in the group. It will be helpful. Other people can also learn from your question. Thank you very much. Thanks for your listening. Bye bye. Bye bye. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye bye.